Obviously you're not always able to get user feedback, but how often are you incorporating that into before your release cycles? I was just curious.
Yeah, so we have, I mean, it has varied I think there's a general practice, but it sometimes usually it varies with the company. So we actually have a team of UX researchers at Renaissance. And I mean, we do a lot of studies beforehand, especially if it's a very complicated space that we're going to be digging into. But like in terms of feedback, are you referring specifically to after like feedback from designs, like user testing of design concepts?
Yeah, and half my question tapped off during that, but yeah, are you doing any additional changes after you release? Like, are you getting additional feedback once you go live?
We are, yeah, we definitely are. I think sometimes the barrier to that is that for some companies, and I think some companies are getting better than others at it, is that it's not this big bang ship it and then we like pat ourselves on the back and we think are done. There's always this ongoing work that needs to be done for improvement plus pruning, and that was sort of the crux of the talk that I had. Is that when we don't do that, all that stuff is building up, and that's all going to contribute to debt. It's going to slow us down, right? That was sort of the whole idea behind the talk. We definitely are getting feedback afterwards, and we're tuning as we go. But I think what we're trying to do is put that effort, that research effort up front. And then when we have design concepts, we'll do A/B testing, we'll do user testing so that we have more confidence and reduce our uncertainty before we release. But then, as you're pointing out, that following up on that of what additional work needs to be done once it's really out in the world is important. And we do that. I do think that there's definitely room for improvement there, though.
Yeah, that's great.
Great. To kind of shape and at the start of this conversation for people tuning in, the topics around empowering high-performing teams with better work practices. And so there's 3 areas that I'd like to focus on, and I'd be open to your suggestions on others. But the one would be around skill set, another would be on motivation, and then is it better in terms of structure? So the first one I'll talk through is skill set. So for high performing teams, is there anything that you feel on the skill sets area that's needed? Does skills or talent matter when it comes to high performing teams? And Teresa, I will ask you that question first.
Sure. Yeah, we'll give Scott a break for a second. Yeah, so usually when I'm building a product and UX team, I like to kind of have a mix. So we're really big on personality profiles. So usually try to bring in both a mix of personality profiles and then from a skill set, a combination of analytical and strategic thinkers. And really what we found is kind of combining that together kind of covers all your bases, everything from our 2-hour design sprints to just how we go and perform on the different products and solutions.
Love that. And Scott, what about you? What's the skill set kind of do you look for?
I would agree with Teresa. It's probably a cheap answer, but I would agree with Teresa. Like having a variety of skills is important. In fact, it has come in to be detrimental in some cases where, you have a strategic thinker and they may not be the strongest visual designer, but they're thinking big picture and all the way around end to end in a future vision. But they don't have the polish that a visual designer, a very creative visual designer might bring to the table. And I've seen really awesome collaboration between those different skill sets. And you're actually cross-pollinating because you're taking your visual designer who's working to be a strategic thinker, and they're building skills from one another.
Yeah, no, I like that. And it just reminds me, this whole skills piece, it reminds me of a talk that was done by Netflix around when you're onboarding new people versus current people working in the team. You look at better work practices, you create a structure that you feel is right for your team. Then you get a new person coming on board that they've worked at a different structure in a different company and you hire them for a reason. How do you, Teresa first, how do you manage work practices and processes, and then at the same time allow people the autonomy to come in and shape the culture of the company?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And, I'll say it has changed. So I mentioned, so we've been remote for 2 years in March, and we're not going to be going back to the office until a bit later this year. And so I would say it's definitely changed since we've been remote. And how I've countered that is, first of all, I think there's usually a pretty large asset of why we've hired someone, and we want them to bring that outside knowledge in to help shape where we're trying to go, both from a strategic and analytic standpoint, as mentioned earlier. And so usually what I do from a team training standpoint is every time someone new comes in, I set up a name of about 30 individuals across the entire company, and I have them meet with them for 30 minutes to an hour to learn about their role, and then also knowledge share kind of their background. And then I also do, it used to be monthly training. It's gotten a little more challenging with meetings because our team is growing, which is always a good thing. But usually do at least monthly or quarterly training on different product or UX or design topics as a group and team building. And so really what I try to do there is allow that person to take their background and bring that knowledge as we cultivate new roadmaps for both product and UX. So, and we've really seen it firsthand. We have actually had a number of new product managers come in, and the amount of ideation that we've been doing really the last several months has been amazing to lift really several year roadmaps, which is what we're working on right now. So,
wow. And have you tried anything that hasn't worked in terms of onboarding and bringing people in?
I think the thing that is always lacking, I mentioned our use of, we don't just use 2-hour design sprints for technologies, but also processes. I think that documentation has been something we've always needed to improve as a team, because we don't have time for it. So we're always busy in client meetings, or we're with engineering or on sales calls. And so we need to be better at documenting and creating more documentation around the training, which we're working on, putting some time towards that. But that's the one thing that hasn't worked, is documenting it. So
documentation debt should be a whole talk in itself. Scott, how about you? So how do you look at getting people involved in their processes?
I think there's a lot of similarities with what Teresa's mentioning. I would say at its core is putting some framework in place that and it can't be too rigid, because for me, like, that has never been successful. Is having some framework that gives them a frame of reference for the space that they're now going to be working in. In addition to that, I think it can't be so rigid that it doesn't allow them to sort of bring their creativity and bring their ideas to the table to help maybe better support that framework. I think bringing people on board is like the product experience. Like, it's always evolving. How are we always working to prune and make it better? We do at Renaissance, we meet like twice weekly for just connecting, because there's different designers working on different things. And so we just want to share what we're working on, not only do critiques of our work, because it actually helps us to be better presenters. It helps us formulate our thinking. So it's besides just the design, there's also sort of this influence or presentation skills that we're trying to build up in people, not only the researchers, but the designers as well. So there's different workshops that we might do together. There's different, we do sort of like a round robin in our group for doing presentations. It's sort of like a UX training, but it's individual designers presenting on whatever topic they have at the top of their mind. It may not even be UX related, but it may be industry related, and we're in the ed tech space. So that's another opportunity of just giving people room to grow within the space of the framework that they've been presented, because there's nothing more crushing than like taking a really creative person and putting them into this framework, and they have no room to have any influence at all. That's just so soul crushing, and I've seen it before, and it's not a good place to be.
No, it's not. I have an audience question here that I'll ask you, Scott. How do you build the skill sets within teams when a particular area is lacking? That's a very good question.
So skill sets within the team when a particular skill set is lacking.
Yes. Or even possible area, I think they might be talking about, not even just the skill set, but probably shortened resources might be a question.
So when I was working at Delta, we had a bunch of designers that were coming on, and they were always looking for very specific skills. Now, I mean, you have this balance of, do you hire people for the specific skills that they have, or you sort of hire a generalist? And like, you can argue one way or the other, but I'd say at Delta, we were trying to hire, like, in the beginning, they were trying to hire like generalists, but what they really needed was really strong interaction designers who have this more of technical understanding, because it's a very complicated technical space that they were working in. And so they also had this tendency to want to hire visual designers, which is great. I mean, we want the products to look awesome, but we're also in IT with a very highly complicated system. So what we recognized is, like, those are, as a team, we got together at least once a week. And we identified, okay, we need to see that this is the direction that the platform is moving, with just being at a high level and working with the architects and all the high level stakeholders. And so there were certain areas where we needed to learn to balance as a team. Where do we put our emphasis on visual design, and where do we put our emphasis on, say, interaction design, and just with the behavioral side of the user experience? So I think that was good in helping the team balance, like, am I spending too much time here doing visual design? Because it might look great, but I completely miss the point when it comes to the behavior and the desired goal that we're designing towards. And so I think as a team, when we began to see that, we began to sort of, I may be a jack of all trades in that moment as a designer, but I needed to sort of figure out where I really should be digging in. Is maybe I don't understand this space well enough, and I need to do some research and get a better understanding of the problem space before I spend all this time doing visual design. Because I've seen on the flip side, where you might have a visual designer and they do this beautiful design, but you're completely missing the mark on the understanding of the problem. And so I think that's where having those exercises and keep bringing the team back into that awareness of this space that they're working in, of where they need, what lever, when do they need to pull the right levers and press the right buttons to balance out their workload. And as we begin over time, we began to see where people's strengths and weaknesses were, and actually people begin to realize that, well, this I'm not as strong in this area, so this is something that I want to work on, or vice versa. I'm really strong in this area, and there may be some other area. I actually realized, like, I really like doing the research side of things. So that, I think that helped the team recognize as a group, not just as an individual, but as a group, because sometimes other people see strengths or weaknesses that we didn't even know we had.
Yeah, I like that. Teresa, did you have anything to comment? I have another question for you otherwise.
Sure. No, that was really great. I was going to say the only thing to add to that would be, I really feel when hiring the team, when you kind of have those missing skill sets, that sometimes you kind of look for those gray areas and see who can grow into them with additional training opportunities and learning. So I think we kind of take a similar approach with that, and then look for additional training opportunities. And then ultimately, if it's not there, making the case for kind of growing the team a bit more in like a front end developer, or to your point, interaction designer that could have a little more of a focused area for that. So it's great.
That's really good. And I wanted to move the conversation to motivation, because often motivation in a team environment is the biggest driver for success over anything else. Teresa, I'll start with you, because you shaped your talk around the sprints. How else do you ensure the team is motivated and that they're in an aligned direction?
Sure. I really think in today's age, where you have a lot of attrition and a lot of remote and virtual, that tying employees back to the company mission and strategy is really important. So that's really what I've done with my team, and that we have tried to do as an org to kind of combat attrition. And with that, with our company mission, we've really set our strategy for the next several years. And so what I've done with the team, both product, UX, and design, is really tied them to the mission of individual product roadmaps that then tie back to the company vision. And so that's kind of one way. And then the other way, still being remote, I'm really big on team building. I'm known for bringing in surprise improv folks to kind of do little events, before the pandemic. And so I've kind of tried to keep that same mentality with team building of little events together, whether it's that or maybe going out for some coffee or some drinks on a quarterly basis. So
coffee and drinks, it can be as simple as that. Scott, how about you? What do you do for motivation?
I think I think vision is a really big one. And certainly like team building exercises are always good. I sometimes, what I find is, what I have found personally is people who want to be creative, generally they're not really given permission to. It's sort of like you're in this box. Like I'll take a front end engineer, for example. Front end engineers are, especially rock stars, they want to solve problems, and they have better ideas than I do on how to solve the problem because they understand the technology better than I do. But they're not really given permission. Like typically they may be doing middle tier engineering or even some of the back end engineering, but really their passion is on the front end. And so when I identify those things in people, I want to try to find them opportunities to step out of their lane and give them room to begin to ideate, to begin to think. And I have found that really inspires people, not only to want to be more creative and be involved in that creative process and solutioning and understanding the problem space, just digging deeper. Like I'm not just, building a widget and shipping it. Like I'm actually solving a problem, and I believe in the mission of what we're working towards. So I found that to be extremely powerful for people. And that has been a huge motivator that I've seen in people. Not only that, but the more that I see people given the freedom to do that, they will often come to me with solutions that I had never even thought about before. There has been many instances where like an engineer might come to me and say, hey, you know what? I was remembering that research that we looked at, the video we watched of a said customer. And I was looking into this defect that came up, and I think we should solve it this way. And it never dawned on me. But had you not given the person the space to actually think and to step outside of their lane a little bit, then you probably never would have had it. Again, it's one of those soul crushing experiences where, and I used to joke about this with a coworker, like you're taking this really creative person who has just this tremendous amount of passion for solving problems, and then you put them in this rigid structure and you just squeeze the creativity right out of them. It's sad to see that.
Yeah, and what can at a management level, what can people do to, and likewise at the individual level, what can people do to change that if they feel like they're being squeezed and not given the freedom and flexibility?
I'd say I want to preface anything that I say with like, I'm not that higher level person. I don't set that. I mean, I can contribute to the culture, but usually like the culture should start at the top and should permeate. But, then you can sort of have these micro cultures within the bigger culture. I hear a lot of companies talk about, we need to be more collaborative. And as I think Jovi started out here, it's like we should collaborate because that's how teams are more successful. I think a lot of companies say that, but then they actually forget that it's not actually happening. And then so I think there needs to sort of start at the bottom. I mean, it has to be supported at the top, but I think it needs to happen at the bottom organically of people just sort of organizing. I'm not talking about protests. I'm not talking about any of that. Just people need to just recognize there is a ton of value here, and they need to circulate that to management. But it's management, if they really believe that, then they should find opportunities to put that into practice. And I can certainly be a contributor to that. We're working on a product right now, or a feature right now, which is pretty big, probably multi-year. And I'm pulling in as many people as I can from all different kinds of departments. But it's not because the management says you can't, or whether I should or whether I shouldn't. I just know that that's the right thing to do. And I'm doing that through the partnership of all these various stakeholders, and that they all sort of have a say. So that it may be said at the top, but it's not the top that says, comes down and says, thou shalt partner and be more lean. Like it has to be something that we have to contribute to individually, not just sort of come down from on high.
Yeah, find opportunities and be accountable, I guess, for your own direction as well. I have a question here from a member of the audience. How can you engage a seasoned expert, a rock star, who can't accept the new work models, example, agile process?
Is that a question for me?
I'll give that to Teresa. I had that in my head for Teresa. Sorry, Scott, I'll give you a break.
Sure. No, that's a really great question. I think we've all definitely had or have rock stars on the team that, started all the way back to waterfall, but then not even with that, just any process, whether it's agile, lean, or any adaptation. So yeah, no, that's a really solid question. And I think it really does tie back to the engagement. So if there's an issue with the processes, making sure that there's something that's tying them to the vision and strategy and how they're a part of it, and what really drives them and their passion. I've had similar instances of this where I got them involved in hackathons and additional client meetings, and kind of, even though they weren't really wanting to be a people leader, learning more about leadership and different opportunities. So there's different ways to really supplement. You're ultimately, you're not going to be able to change unless you're able to change the process as a whole and kind of have them provide that feedback and grow with them. You want to provide those additional opportunities to supplement while you work on that adaptation of the process to get them to feel more comfortable.
And without too much context on this person's question, I always find a rock star or a seasoned person that's been in the company maybe a long time, it might be up to that individual. They almost are afraid of change. And I think that can be a problem too. They've been known as that expert and that rock star. So it's you need to be very vulnerable to let that go. So it's almost a mindset, in my opinion, and changing their showing the positives of actually not knowing everything and getting them on board from that end. Really great. And Scott, I wanted to go back to what you mentioned on the physical space and creating a barrier between teams. And this is more bringing Teresa into this conversation. If you recall, Teresa, Scott just mentioned about he physically sat in different teams because there was a barrier between them, and it worked better. Teresa, what do you do? Do you find that in terms of team structure, people that work together physically in the same space and that are traditionally on different teams will work better, or does it make a difference?
Yeah, no, that's really great. And again, this has really just changed and adapted for us during the pandemic of us kind of being in a physical space to remote. But before the pandemic, we actually co-located all of our engineers, product design, and UX in different space areas. It wasn't little, it was large space. But we co-located the teams together with all the groups. And I mean, they were one team and one mesh team. And so we've kind of tried a couple different processes of how we replicate that while remote. So we'll have either Slack or Teams channels where everyone sits on there all day. We've tried little Tiger rooms where maybe there's a really big project and everyone's just kind of live on their video camera all day. And so I really think in order to build up that type of mesh team like that, you do need that cross collaboration and to get everyone to become a little closer. Otherwise, you will and could have some conflict if you're not able to develop that close relationship.
Great. And Scott, is there an ideal team makeup from your perspective? Is it similar in terms of the relationships?
I think a relationship is a big part of it, but fundamentally, when I think about Agile, I think, and don't quote me on the structure, but I think you have to have like an exact number, a certain number of engineers, a certain number of QA. I don't remember what the exact
It's like 5 to 7 and
1 to 3, something like that.
Yeah.
Right. And then I think ideally you'd have one designer and or some researcher. I've pretty much every company I've worked at has had they always start with the engineering Agile structure, and then they sort of add or sprinkle on UX where it's appropriate, where they have resources. They may be shared resources, but I think that would be ideal. It's like at least one designer and one researcher. There have been cases where we've had projects that were just so big we had to stagger the research because there was just a lot of discovery that was needed in the beginning. So they might have paired together, but as we went forward, maybe there was two different designers who were working together. It might have been a visual designer and more of like a strategic thinker, sort of bringing their minds together. So, but I think there is an ideal structure of having at least one designer per team, and additionally, typically researchers. They could probably be shared depending on the volume of work.
Do you currently have one designer and one UX researcher dedicated per engineering team?
Right now, we're structured by, I guess what I'll call them is like these pillars. We have assessment products, we have practice products, and then we have platform. I'm primarily on platform, and we do have a number of designers that are dedicated to each of those pillars. And then we have researchers that are dedicated to those pillars as well. So that there's still some question and some potential. My manager, Jonathan Mann, he's the vice president of UX. And so he's looking at whether that's an effective structure or not, or maybe he wants to mix it up a little bit, but I'm not going to speak for him. But I mean, I think it's been working well for us where teams can really dig into an assessment space or a practice space or just focus on the platform without getting interrupted. Because if you're working on a wide variety of products in a suite and you're constantly switching tasks, it's really hard to dig into a problem space and really, really get to know it.
Yeah, I would love I would love a dedicated designer and researcher per team. We have a large amount of engineering teams, so we're kind of on more of like a 2-to-1, 3-to-1 model for that. As it really depends on how much flow of work you have coming in too. But no, that's really great. I would definitely enjoy that. So.
Yeah, that's sort of where we are too. It's like one designer to a couple of teams. I think like me being on platform, I'm sort of dedicated to maybe 4 teams. But most of them, because this platform, are doing a lot of the back end work. So my focus is largely on the teams that are doing front end work.
Awesome.
Great. We've had a lot of questions. In fact, too much now that we are running out of time. So I have a comment here. So the manager staff don't support to fix those issues. Would be another one. And then the other question here is, when you're hired as a UX for a web app, and in the accessibility evaluation it shows 1 million errors, and when they show the report to the manager, they decide to kick you off the UX. It sounds like somebody is quite frustrated there. Has anyone a comment on that? You're shaking your head, Scott.
I'm just thinking, ouch, because you're just the sort of the bringer of bad news. But that is the reality, right? It's like, hey, look, we did an analysis, and at Renaissance, I'd say over the past couple, we have a senior accessibility professional who has come on our UX team just last year. She's doing a fantastic job, and the company is really taking it to heart. I mean, if we really believe in improving and accelerating learning for everyone, literally everyone, we cannot discount that. And so the company is really taking that to heart over the past couple of years. And I think that now when we bring those sorts of reports to the teams, they're like, okay, well, we need to do something. We need to address this. We can't keep kicking that can down the road. As with other companies that I've worked for, that is something that they kept kicking it down the road. Now I say that being that it's one thing to kick that can down the road versus kicking the person down the road because you don't like the message that they're giving.
Yes. Yeah, you always have to take the individual out of it, assume in good faith. And Laurie asks, how has inclusive design and accessibility fit into your team and process? And we've run out of time, so if you could answer that very quickly. Teresa, you first.
Sure. In terms of how it fits into the team and process, so we have kind of, I'll say like we've actually been building up our UX and design team over the years. So when we first had the team several years ago, a lot of the product managers were doing low fidelity designs and balsamic and so forth. And so depending on how far along your organization is in the journey really depends how that accessibility fits into the greater organization for product and technology. And so now we basically were able to build up the need and use cases for those teams. In our research team, we have a head of UX at TreviPay that has performs about 20 to 30 research projects a year that we do on use case and studies involving both designers and product and our clients and users. And then we also kind of have both international design hub in Australia as well as in the US and a couple states. And so really, in terms of inclusive design, you kind of grow with it on your journey with your product and solutions. As you continue to expand those and get more clients and gain that traction, you grow the team with it and kind of fit that demand. So next up for us is maybe getting more front-end developers, which we only have a handful right now. So.
Yeah, perfect. I have to cut that short, this short. It was absolutely amazing to talk to you both. You are legends is all I can say. And thank you very much for an enlightening session and Q&A. So thank you all. And I'll hand it back over to Jovi.
Thank you.